Dear learners, here in this chapter, we will understand what are the principles of forensic science. Since forensic science is a combination of science and law, there are a set of principles on which the forensic experts rely. In this context, the very first principle we will talk about is the principle of individuality, which states that everything has some individual characteristics which cannot be duplicated in any manner. It is believed that nature has created everything unique. Everything has unique specific features which cannot be duplicated by the mankind. In this regard, this principle is very important in solving criminal mysteries. What happens is when an offense is committed, it is committed in some particular manner. This peculiarity of the manner, which in legal terms we call as modus operandi, is unique. It is unique and its uniqueness may be associated with the criminal behavior, and in this way, who has committed the offense, it can be traced. Similarly, the trace evidence which is found at the crime scene also possess some uniqueness. Like the fingerprints are unique, DNA evidence is unique, the track marks found at the crime scene are unique, and all other trace evidences are unique. This uniqueness in the samples collected from the crime scene may be compared and analyzed with those collected from the suspects. With the help of the uniqueness, there may be a link established, and with the help of this link, it will be able to identify the culprit. Therefore, this principle of individuality, or sometimes we call it as principle of uniqueness, is very important. Next principle is the principle of exchange. It was propounded by Sir Edmund Locard. It is a very simple and commonsensical principle which states that whenever two entities come in contact, mutual exchange of traces takes place. We can understand with the help of an example, like if you go to a sea beach in the evening, certainly when you will leave and you will come to your house, you will find the traces of the sand of the beach in your shoes. Similarly, the beach will also be having the traces of your footprints. It means there has been an exchange of traces, and with the help of this evidence, your presence at the sea beach may be confirmed. In criminal context, we can understand this principle in cases of rape. Whenever a rape is committed, DNA in the form of semen is present in the private parts of the victim, while the traces of pubic hair and other important evidence related to scratches of nails of the victim, any other injury, blood of the victim, they all are present on the body or clothes of the suspect. In this manner, these traces are exchanged between the victim and the offender, and it helps in establishing a link between the victim and the offender. Similarly, when a crime is committed, certain traces of the crime scene are taken by the offender unknowingly, and some traces of the offender are left at the crime scene by the offender unknowingly. Therefore, this principle helps in establishing a link between the criminal and the crime scene, the criminal and the victim, the criminal and the weapon of offense, the weapon of offense and the victim. Thus, this principle holds an important place in forensic science, or we can say the entire discipline of forensic science revolves around the principle of exchange. Be it any technique, DNA fingerprinting, fingerprint analysis, track mark analysis, trap evidence, in all such techniques, the principle which plays an important role is the principle of exchange. The next principle in this regard is law of progressive change. It is evident that everything changes with the passage of time. See, if we look at a boy who was 5 years old, and then after a few years we see the boy and he is 15 years old now, there will be a lot of change in the physical attributes of the boy. Similarly, if you visit a place today and you have visited that place 10 years back, there will be several changes in the place. This is a change which happens with the passage of time. Whenever a crime is committed, law of progressive change demands prompt action because there may be a change in the physical attributes of the individual who has committed the offense or even the victim. Suppose a murder is committed today only and the investigation starts after a week. It is certain that the body would be decomposed and the majority of the injuries on the body would not be traced and the nature of offense cannot be ascertained. Similarly, if a person committed a crime today and the investigation starts after 10 or 20 years after the commission of crime, then it would be very difficult and almost impossible to trace and find out that offender because there may be several physical changes in the body, gestures, expressions, and everything of that individual. Similarly, the progressive change happens with crime scene also. Suppose Allahabad is a flood prone area and some offense is committed near the river bank in the month of June, but the investigation is started in the month of October when the area has already been flooded by the rivers. It is very much clear that no evidence can be collected from that crime scene. Therefore, the law of progressive change asserts that in every possible manner, the investigations should be conducted as soon as possible. The next principle in this regard is law of comparison, which says that only likes can be compared. This principle emphasizes on the principle of comparison. For instance, some DNA sample is collected from the crime scene in the form of blood. The blood group is A+. There are 8 suspects of the crime, 2 of which possess A+ blood group and the rest possess different blood groups like B negative, O positive, AB positive, etc. Now, law of comparison says that the sample which has been collected from the crime scene should be compared with the sample of those two persons who possess A plus blood group. Similarly, if like the example which is quoted in the site, if a curly hair is recovered from the crime scene, or where it can be ascertained that it is a hair of a Negro, then it should be compared with the hair of Negro only and nobody else. Law of comparison plays an important role in the field of forensic science because until and unless the clues are compared, no technique can be considered to be important for deriving the conclusions. For instance, if any trace evidence in the form of fingerprint is recovered from the crime scene, then it has to be compared from the fingerprints of the suspects. Similarly, if a DNA strand, you can say a sample, is collected from the crime scene, then it has to be compared from the DNA samples of the suspects. Again, if some track evidence in the form of footprint, tire print, or some shoe print is collected from the crime scene, then it has to be compared with those of the suspects. So the law of comparison also plays an important role in the field of forensic science. Law of analysis is the next principle. The analysis can be no better than the sample analyze. It is a very important principle which has often been ignored, especially by the forensic scientists and the investigation agencies. As we all know, whenever a crime is committed, the first person who visits the crime scene is the police officer. It is the duty of the police officer to first and foremostly barricade the crime scene so as to avoid the contamination of the evidence. It is very necessary to call forensic experts at the crime scene so that they may collect the evidences available on the crime scene in the requisite manner. Suppose a glass is found at the crime scene containing fingerprints. Then it is necessary that this glass should be collected in a way that the fingerprints are not lost. Again, if the body of the victim is present on the crime scene, then it is necessary that the body should be packed and sealed very carefully, and it should be sent to the morgue and the forensic labs as soon as possible so as the putrefaction of the body does not occur and the body may be helpful in providing all the necessary evidence which may be helpful for finding out the real culprit. This law of analysis emphasizes on proper handling and proper sampling of the samples collected from the crime scene so that there may be no contamination and best analysis may be done so as to apprehend the culprit without any doubt. As it is known to everyone who is in the field of law that if the guilt is not proved beyond doubt, then you cannot make that accused guilty. So this law of analysis is again an important principle of forensic science. The next principle is law of probability. Probability determines the chances of occurrence of a particular event in a particular way out of a number of ways in which the event can take place or fail to take place with equal facility or identification. Definite or indefinite are made consciously or unconsciously on the basis of probability. In easy terms, it may be said that law of probability is very important for the purposes of forensic science because whenever some comparison takes place between the samples collected from the crime scene and those of the suspects. It is not necessary that they are 100% similar, or you can say 100% same. It is merely a probability. Whenever the probability is more, it is said that this sample collected from the crime scene belongs to suspect A. It is not 100% a surety because the crime scene contains the evidence in some sort of distorted way. They are not very crystal clear. So the law of probability is a very relevant principle in the field of forensic science. The next and the last principle is facts do not lie, men can do. Before the coming of this new discipline, or we can say before the advent of forensic science as a regular course of criminal investigations, generally the trials were based on the testimonies of the eyewitnesses, approvers, and other sort of evidences. There were chances that these evidences may be colored, their testimonies may be sort of distorted, or they have some individual interest in the some sort of interest. They want to get that suspect into difficulties, and therefore they are framing lies, they are telling lies, because there was no other means to find out the real truth. Therefore courts were reluctant, and they had to place their opinions, they had to frame their decisions on the basis of the testimonies of such people. In this manner, we can say that this principle is relevant because it encourages the courts to rely on scientific evidence, to rely on the testimonies of experts, to rely on the scientific processes, scientific tools and techniques which are used in forensic investigations. They rely on framing new laws for the appraisal of scientific evidence, and so that easy and early investigations may be done. In this regard, these are the few principles of forensic science, and it can be said that these principles are not only pivotal in criminal investigations, but they also plays a greater role while the evidence is produced in the court of law. These principles are not restricted to one technique only. These principles are generally used almost in every technique. For example, when a fingerprint is collected, it is compared, it is analyzed, there are chances of probabilities, it is dependent upon the principle of exchange, it has some individuality features also, and it has to be collected in time, otherwise due to progressive change it may be lost. So almost all the principles are involved in every technique, and therefore it may be said that these are the fundamental principles of forensic science. Thank you.